proceed. Oops. There you go. So, if I can have everybody's attention. I think in the next section we will look at school diversity. Again, we'll have a very similar format. We'll try and sort of understand what do we mean, what are some of the analysis that will be covered.
Obviously, all of these are really important presentations, really important that you're able to, and everybody's able to hear them. Just like to ask you to kind of pay attention to the presentation. There'll be more time to discuss immediately after the presentation. Thank you.
So, what we really want to do here is start to look at, understand MCPS diversity and understand why is it important. You want to understand the range of socioeconomic and demographic dissimilarity across and within clusters. And really, when we talk about diversity, we'll be looking at a range of analysis, as I mentioned earlier. We'll be including demographic diversity as well as socioeconomic diversity. And again, there will be sort of a range of analysis that our interim and final report will put out. But again, for the purpose of this analysis, we will, because we have time constraints, of course, we'll be looking at ever farms as sort of a proxy for understanding socioeconomic issues. Again, it's not the only factor that we'll be looking at, but it will be one of the things that we'll discuss tonight. So why is it important? Student diversity is important for increasing critical thinking and creativity, reducing racial bias, preparing for success in a global economy, and improving test scores. There are a range of articles that we have cited in our handbook. I believe it's page 45 or 46 of your handbook. While that list is not meant to be exhaustive in many ways, but it's supposed to sort of guide the discussion around school diversity. So if anybody is interested, please sort of follow those studies and kind of follow the links in there. So what we'll be looking at here is sort of really define ever farms. So let's first understand what is ever farms and then kind of get into, again, cluster and then each of those grade band analysis. So what is ever farms? Ever farms are students that are or have ever been on free and reduced meals. I'm going to say that again. Ever farms are students that currently are or have ever been on free and reduced meals. And this is during their time at MCPS. The graph on the right-hand side of the screen, it is kind of representation of the student at an individual school. So think of it as sort of the total students in an individual school. The black line in the center, and I'm just going to hover my mouse right over there so you can see, that is the cluster average. In this case, we'll be looking at percentage of ever farms. And then we'll be sort of mapping each of the schools in relation to that cluster average. And really kind of plot that out and see how does that range look like. So let's dive into a cluster example and really try and put this in perspective. Again, for this particular example, we have looked at Richard Montgomery as a cluster example. Again, this does not mean that our analysis will only focus on this. This is meant for illustrative purposes only. And once you sort of start to dig into the data, you can see, and I'm just gonna hover my mouse over there, that the cluster average is about 36%, which means that of the total students of Richard Montgomery, total students within Richard Montgomery Elementary Schools, there are about 36% that are ever farms students, right? But within that, look at the range of values within that. You can see that Ritchie Park Elementary School is at about 11%, and then you can look at Twin Brooks Elementary School, which is at about 77%. And again, look at the map on the right-hand side of the screen. Focus on sort of the colors, and you can see how sort of the lighter shades are next to darker shades. And again, what does this really mean? When we kind of zoom out and start to look at elementary school ever farms analysis, again, this should be part of your handbook that you have on your table as well. You can see that out of the 135 schools, the total number of students that are on ever farms, that value is about 44%. I'm just going to hover my mouse right around there. That means 44% of the total elementary schools students are ever farm students. But again, look at the range within that. There is one particular school where that value is as high as 94%, which means 94% kids are ever farms students. And then there's one school in particular which is the value is as low as 1%. Again, the map to the right-hand side of the screen, just focus on the adjacencies. Focus on where we see sort of lighter shades next to darker shades. And what does that mean? At this point, if you're really interested in understanding some of the interrelationship of it, try and sort of flip through this map in your handbook and kind of flip through the utilization map of elementary schools at the same time. And see if you can come up with certain ideas on why that might happen. Similarly, if you kind of look at middle school, you can see that the total students that are on EverFarm students, that number is 47%, which means that out of the total students of middle school, 47% of the students are EverFarm students. Again, you look at the disparities, and you can see that about 80, there is one particular middle school where that value is as high as 87%. And then there is one particular school where the value is as low as 3%. So look at that range. And middle schools also have the highest district-wide share of EverFarm's eligible students, amongst, again, between elementary, middle, and high. Again, map to your right-hand side of the screen. Please focus on the colors, the adjacencies of those colors. Look at where you have sort of the lighter shades next to the darker shades. Again, what does that tell us? Again, feel free to flip back and forth between this map, EverFarm's map in middle school, and the utilization map of the middle school, and see if there are sort of certain narratives there. Similarly, for high school, we can see that the total student EverFarm's population is about 46%. And then there is one particular high school where the value is as high as 82%, and there's one particular school where the value is at 4%. Again, look at the disparities, and the map to the right, and please focus on the colors and adjacencies. Where do you see lighter shades next to darker shades? And again, what does that tell us? So with that, we'd like to pivot into table discussion and talk a little bit more about it. What I'd like to leave you with is this. When you start to look at elementary school, middle school, and high schools, you can see that about 35% of elementary, 40% of middle, and 36% of high schools have substantially higher proportion of EverFarm's eligible students.
Great, thank you, Kushan. So again, I'm going to ask you to bring out your worksheets again. There's a couple of questions that you'll see it's the same format for questions in each round. We're really looking to get your feedback on what was presented, and kind of what's meaningful, what did you observe, what do you see in the maps and in the data that was presented, and what else you believe should be included in this part of the boundary analysis around student body diversity. So consult the maps as you need it. Again, you'll have about a dozen minutes here for a conversation at the table.